Welcome to Your First Home Buyer Guide, the podcast for first home buyers who want to get it right.
I'm Megan and that was Veronica. We're both buyers agents and probably old enough to be your mums. But that's a good thing because between us we've got over 40 years experience and we are going to share with you bucket loads of stories about avoidable mistakes. Together we're going to make sure that you get unbiased and real information that you can rely on so you can get where you want to be without missing a step.
Now, we've got loads of great tips for you in this episode, and if you'd like more useful tools, head over to the website homebuyeracademy.com.au. There you'll find free checklists that you can download, a free mini course on how to price a property, and our Where to Buy workshop for only $39. Priceless stuff, really.
Bargain. But before we get into the interesting stuff in this week's episode, here's the boring bit, the disclaimer. You, of course, know that nothing in this podcast is to be taken as personal advice. We always recommend getting the advice of an expert in their field of expertise. Now, we've done our very best to ensure that the content is correct at the time of recording, but things change. So check with the relevant government authority or your advisors to get the most up-to-date information.
Now, we've got a new workshop that we're bringing to you. It's the Stepping Stone Strategy Workshop. We're running this online live, on Saturday, 19th of June from 2 o'clock in the afternoon. You get to do the workshop, but also ask us loads of questions.
Looking forward to it. I'm quite excited about this one actually because we ran a poll and we asked people, what do you want from us next? What part of our brain do you want to pick? And it was rent bursting versus stepping stone strategy, and more than double the amount of people wanted the stepping stone strategy. So if you want to make sure that your first property does the heavy lifting to make sure that your dream home will be achievable in the future, then the Stepping Stone Strategy Workshop is the place to come to get the foundation steps right so that you get that first purchase on the ladder right and then can step towards the dream home.
Now, to find out more, look at homebuyeracademy.com.au/SSW. It's that simple, but we will put the link in the show notes. These live workshops, we only do them a few times a year and they're fantastic, so please join us.
Hi and welcome back. In this episode, we're doing a regional spotlight focusing on the things that first home buyers need to know about buying in regional New South Wales. Now, local knowledge is so important. We bang on about this all the time when you're buying property. And today we're talking to a local expert who is going to share his tips on what first home buyers should be looking for and the mistakes they can avoid in their areas. Our guest buyer's agent is, drumroll please, Matthew Ward from Aspect Buyers Agency, which is actually based in Orange, New South Wales. Thanks for joining us.
No worries, Megan. Thanks for having me.
Lovely. Now, first of all, Matthew, you're based in Orange, but you actually cover a really wide range from Blue Mountains out to Dubbo, down to Wagga, up to Tamworth. Are there any areas you cover where you've noticed a lot more first home buyer activity, particularly those moving out of the cities maybe?
Yeah, look, the price point in Sydney has really woken people up. I think the COVID experience has changed the game out this way a lot. And I guess the timing of the NBN rollout was pretty critical there. If we were all still on dial-up, I think things would have been very different. But look, the NBN...
How's the irony of that?
But the NBN was rolled out and then COVID happened, and then all of a sudden the world had to think of a new way to live. And through that process, I think it really woke people up to the options of, well, that you can leave Sydney, you can get a job, you can live, you can go back to Sydney, but you can also, get a better lifestyle if that's the sort of lifestyle that you want. Not everyone wants to be the inner city, trendy couple. And if you're living in, anywhere in Sydney and you can't afford, or any capital city really, but Sydney is where most of my clients come from, and you can't afford to buy homes and you want to get off that rental sort of conveyor belt, regional somewhere has become the affordable option. And I think being trapped in New South Wales has forced people to travel and see what New South Wales regionally has to offer. And they get across the mountains and go, oh, geez, actually, this is not so bad.
We're also lucky it's no longer a drought, aren't we? I mean, if we went over the mountains when it was in a drought, we might not be thinking it's not so bad.
No, that's right. Certainly the seasons has helped. It's all fallen into place for regional New South Wales, breaking of the drought and COVID and all those sorts of things. But look, here in Orange, I think COVID realistically lasted about 6 weeks for us. And then we got out of lockdown and life went back to normal.
Isn't that interesting? It was such a short period of time in some locations. And look, we're not medical experts and certainly not pandemic experts, but, it's really interesting in talking to different buyers agents from different regions, how differently they were impacted. We had Kate Bakos who talked about, Melbourne and regional Melbourne being locked down for such a long period of time, but now really strong growth again. And you're saying that there was only about 6 weeks where everyone had a long extended holiday, really?
Pretty much. Once we were allowed out of the house again, and with COVID distancing and all that sort of stuff, like we haven't had an outbreak here. I think we might have had 3 or 4 cases pass through town, and they went for a coffee or something. But there was no local contagion here. So as long as everyone just wore their masks, which actually that didn't even happen for long either, to be honest.
Isolation can be positive in some circumstances, and I guess this is where we've seen it's kind of worked for us even as an island. It's worked in our favour. Tell us, Matthew, what are first home buyers buying in those areas?
Yeah, look, it really depends on where their money's coming from, and obviously there's the banks, and then there's also the banks of mum and dad, and that is it's quite a common phenomenon that I'm seeing. And that really pitches the budgets quite differently. I've got clients at the moment who have got less than $220,000 for their first home, and I've got other guys who have just went and spent $800,000 from the bank of mum and dad on their first home.
Are they using equity out of their parents' properties? Is that when you say bank of mum and dad? Is that largely coming from their Sydney?
Well, it's Sydney, certainly Sydney. Not sure eastern suburbs. Sort of backing is where they've been from, and how mum and dad get hold of that cash, I didn't get into that detail with them. Just as long as they can pay settle,
as long as they can prove they've got it.
Yeah, that's right. And,
so what is someone who's got $220,000? What are they going to buy?
Well, if you jump on realestate.com and put in under 225,000, you'll show, depending on what, there's 1,500 properties to buy across New South Wales. Now, I actually had a bloke earlier in the year who had 50 grand to spend, and I'm like, I don't know if I want to be part of that. But
Veronica, what are you thinking? Like the corner of a parking space?
Not even Sydney? A car space in Sydney.
No, a corner. No, not the whole thing.
Exactly.
Just where you can put some boxes in the corner of a car park.
Storeroom.
But that guy did go on.
Sorry, Matthew, we digress.
$50,000. My God, that's not even a deposit in Sydney. So
right.
No, it's not even the stamp duty.
Yeah, practically.
No, it's not. And I wasn't involved with that, but I kept in contact with the guy because I was talking about other stuff. But look, he went out to Ivanhoe, I think it was, in the end, and bought a house out there. And Ivanhoe's not the most dynamic market.
But hence why you can buy a house for $50,000.
What could you have bought for $50,000? No, what would you have paid for the same house in Ivanhoe 10 years ago?
$20,000.
Okay, so it's had growth.
Yeah, like it's all relative. Right?
Yeah, it's percentage.
Yeah, and it's not, if it's been renovated or something like that, you get a bit more for it.
Mind you, I'm sure it's not worth renovating at those prices.
Getting tradies is the hardest thing.
Yes.
Yeah, I wonder about overcapitalisation. What sort of rent would you get on something like that? Is it a rent vesting option?
Yeah, $100 a week or something like that. Yeah.
Interesting.
at some level, those things make sense. If you
Wow. So this really opens up. This is a great conversation to have because, these are markets that Veronica and I aren't familiar with. But these are really good opportunities for first-time buyers who can't perhaps gather that deposit. And we talk about different options, stepping stone options and also rent vesting options.
Hey, Megan, you said it was a good opportunity. I think we need to find out more from Matthew whether it really was a good opportunity.
Hang on. This is a good opportunity to talk to someone who knows what they're talking about.
That's a good opportunity.
Let me finish. To see, yes, you can do this, and yes, the rent return sounds good, and yes, there seems to have been some growth there, but, what's the opportunity cost of investing in these types of markets, and was there an anomaly that led to some sort of growth during that period that may not be attainable going forward? So even looking at some of those case studies, Matthew, would it be fair to say, don't just go, what can I buy for under $100,000 and go, throw the dart and that could be good for me because it's got a good rental return. I think there's still a lot more to look at, isn't there?
Yeah. I mean, you think about $100 a week's $5,000 a year. You blow an air conditioning unit up, there's half your rent gone. Well, there's all your rent because you've got rates. All of a sudden you're backwards. And that's the issue with those properties at that value, particularly if you're renting them out. I looked at some property, I think it was $40,000. It was a strata. There was no sinking fund. There was no management. The air conditioning was dead. In hot Western climate, you've got to replace that. So there's $3,000 out of a $5,000 a year income.
Oh.
And then you've got tenants who aren't kind to the property. All of a sudden.
So much to know, so much to understand, so many things to think about.
They aren't all they're cracked up to be. The big numbers sound exciting, but when you actually get into it, they're not so good. But getting back to, say, someone who's got $220,000 to spend, I think there's probably 800 options that I looked at this week for those people, but narrowed it down to probably 2 or 3 suburbs within a regional centre, which aren't social housing dominated, close to shops, on the bus route, those types of things. And now they're going to be pulling 4% net, which is probably where you expect that style of property to be in a serious regional centre. That one's about 80,000 people. So they're still. You can be close to the bottom of the ladder, but you don't have to be on the very bottom rung. You can, if you know what you're looking at and know the areas where you're buying, you can see the opportunities and de-risk them as best as possible. And that's the approach that I take. You're never going to get, A-grade property, but you can limit your risk and exposure to risk by buying the worst house in the best street. It's an old analogy, but that's where it really comes down to. And you've just got to be very picky and just keep looking until the right one comes up. And they are around, but you've really got to understand what you're looking at and do your research and understand why that market moves and what's moving that market and how's it performed and where's it going. And it's all the same stuff that you would for any market, but it's just, you've just got to be very mindful because at the end of the year, on $200,000, you're getting $200 a week rent. That's $10,500. You lose 4 or 5 to strata and rates, and then you got $5,000 at the end of the year, which needs to be carefully monitored.
Absolutely. So that's sort of talking about investment opportunities. Where you talk about what's driving prices, and I would suspect that a lot of that migration from more urban areas is what's driving prices in regional centres. So you've got to be very careful, I guess, that you're buying a good foundation property that's not necessarily only hyped up in price because of all the city slickers. But whereabouts are, I guess, if the big migration of first-time buyers is coming from the cities, where specifically, what sort of locations are they really leaning towards?
Yeah, it's the bigger regional centres. I mean, all areas are. So what's happening is, let's use Orange as the case study. People are coming into Sydney into Orange from Sydney. They've got a skewed idea of what value is.
Yeah. So that you're saying that they look at Orange property through the Sydney lens and go, oh my God, this is great value, such a bargain.
Yeah, look how close we are to the city. You
Yeah.
can walk to the cafes.
Yeah, that's all those 5-minute walk and draw drive to wherever, all those sorts of things. And so Orange was busy before COVID hit. It was already pumping, and then COVID came, and it didn't really slow down too much. And then COVID came out of its box. We all got out of the COVID box, and the world's gone crazy again. So, but Orange is the same as Dubbo and Wagga and Bathurst. All these towns are just going nuts at the moment. Every regional centre you talk to, the agents can't believe it. They can't price property. There's no rental properties. I heard somebody in Bathurst the other day auctioning a rental property. So,
actually illegal in Queensland. So legal in New South Wales, is that?
You can do it here.
Yeah. Okay.
In fact, in Sydney,
incredible.
Not now.
I think the unspoken thing is the rental crisis that we're recording this in May of 2021. We're post-COVID, and a lot of investors have been selling their properties, which has reduced the number of properties available. We don't have buyers buying investment properties at the moment. Owner-occupiers are sucking up all the stock. And it's interesting that you're seeing that in the regional locations as well, because certainly we're seeing it very strongly in Brisbane. And I hold grave fears for that rental market for people who are trying to get into properties.
Yeah. So what is happening is that the rental prices are going up, the values are going up, and the people who are marginal to start with are being pushed out the bottom of the ladder, and as a result, they're being pushed into cheaper markets, which is, the fringe villages or cheaper towns and locations and those sorts of things, which then becomes problematic for jobs, and it just starts a cycle. I was doing some work for a housing provider, and they got some great government funding, and to supply 200 social and affordable housing in Orange, Bathurst and Dubbo. And that was meant to soak up pretty much the whole list of people who are on the wait list.
Okay.
By the time they built it all, that all got absorbed, and the list hasn't changed because more people have been pushed.
Oh wow! So they've been pushed out of private rentals into public housing because they can't rent privately.
So you got two types of first home buyers then, haven't you? You got your local first home buyer who, if I'm reading what you're saying correctly, are being pushed out by the people coming from elsewhere that might have more funds.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's pretty hard because, that will change the flavour of a town for starters, the whole, the demographic makeup. There might be a little bit of resentment from the locals as well, I would imagine.
Yeah. And, I like lots of people. I follow a lot of online forums and read property articles and all those sorts of things. And you pick up sentiments and if one person's prepared to voice it, there's usually 100 supporters who aren't.
Yeah.
And look, there is that element to every market, and I guess the regional markets are the village of Sydney. People who can't afford Sydney are moving out, and particularly those cities that have commutable options back into Sydney. Seeing a lot of sort of those areas, the Bathurst Oranges particularly, where you can still live in Orange 3-4 days a week, commute back to Sydney for the day or two you need to be in the office if you need to be in the office or whatever it is. Some people are back to a day or two a month. And why live in an apartment in the city if you can sell that and move out to a house or a farm or whatever they've decided to for the similar or same money, and then go back to Sydney for the 2 days a week, a month, or whatever it is. I'm seeing a lot of that. That was already happening prior to COVID, but it's on with a vengeance at the moment for sure.
It's interesting. We're seeing it in Brisbane as well. That exodus of people who realise that they can telecommute, if you like, or work from home and just do those few days a week or month. Matthew, I wanted to pick up on something that you said a little bit earlier, and that was around the struggle that agents are having to price properties. It's not unique, but I'm really interested. You're a valuer, so you have a great deal of expertise, experience, and qualifications in this space. Agents, buyers agents, value property, we appraise them. So we talk about what the market value of a property is. But from your experience and depth of knowledge, how in the world are you pricing properties at the moment?
Yeah, well,
tell us what sort of tips could you give first home buyers who are looking at something in Orange or Dubbo or Tamworth, and they're trying to work out, we teach people about using comparable sales methodology and gathering data and analysing it and so forth. But this kind of premium that we're seeing at the moment, what kind of insight can you give people about where they can access knowledge or build their knowledge bank to know what's not ridiculous to pay, but what they're probably going to have to pay?
Yeah, and look, it's research, and what I'm finding is people who have probably been out of touch with the market for even 2 or 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. They're out of it. They're out of touch. So you've really got to be on it and monitoring it. I mean, daily, ideally, in the markets like this. But yeah, anything that's over 6 or 8 weeks old is no longer current, and you've really got to be on yesterday's sale. And to do that, you've got to be talking to agents and following sales and following properties and really finding out where everything's at. I settled a house last week that's gone up 10% in 6 weeks. So what they paid for it was already 50 grand more than the place next door sold 6 weeks earlier. And now it's gone up another.
And quite comparable. Land size is about the same. Number of bedrooms, finishes. Sorry, this is everything that we teach the students to look at. So just referring back to things they'll know. So all of those things were quite comparable, and there's actually been a 10% increase in that property's value. How's that measured? How's that been measured? Is it a valuation that was done at settlement, or is there another sale that would help?
Another sale.
Another sale.
Lead over, same, 4-bed, 2-bath. Double garage, built at the same 2-year period, similar condition, similar orientation. That's where it's at.
Not a lot to differentiate them.
So It sounds like I've been to Orange once, and I actually love it up there. It's gorgeous, and I love the wine, particularly cold climate wine for me, very good. I did notice that there was quite a lot of subdivisions, new subdivisions on the outskirts. And so you got the lovely historic centre of town, as is so common with many of our larger regional centres. And then you've got this urban sprawl. It looks the same as suburban Sydney or Melbourne or Brisbane. Is that the sort of stock you're talking about here? So these are sort of house and land packages that have been sold. How old would they be? So
they'd be 10 years old now, 10 to 12 years old.
And how do they compare to what's newly being built, or are there no more subdivisions?
Well, Orange is out of land at the moment. It's very difficult to come here, pick a block of land and build on it. There's more land being developed at the moment, but we just got caught, as a number of regional cities did, with not enough land zoned, not enough land in the pipeline, and COVID came and, all our land's gone overnight, instead of selling 200, 250 blocks a year up to 300, 400, and all of a sudden you're 5 years behind your program, and that's happened in a period of 12 months. Not something that you could necessarily plan around or prepare for, varying opinions, I'm sure, but we just got caught out. The demand, like Orange, I think, was number 3 in Australia for most listings sold in the last 12 months. So the agents are going, there's no stock. It's like, well, there is stock. You're number 3 in Australia.
Yeah, you're selling a lot.
There's just so many buyers that it's turning over very quickly. Yeah.
Instead of hanging onto a property for a 3-month or a 3 months marketing program, it's gone in 24 hours, and all of a sudden sitting around wondering what you're going to do.
Because of course, that's the scary thing in a country area. The more land subdivision that presumably it's farming land that's being rezoned. I mean, we've got to eat. We've got to stop building houses on these farms, you people. So how many first home buyers would you say would be buying, little farms or those bigger lifestyle blocks?
Oh, not many, to be honest. And they've been just priced out. I mean, the locals have been priced out. I've seen, here's an example, a 250-acre block. The deal was shook hands on in August of 2019. for $1.3 million, delayed for settlement until February of this year. It was revalued at 1.8, and the block next door is on the market for they're asking for around $2 million. So in 18 months' time, this purchaser has picked up $700,000 and he hasn't even settled on the place yet.
Oh, the poor owner,
hasn't
the poor
even put
seller.
the plans in. But I guess at the time that was probably the right money, and that's the thing that we've got to remember is if you are selling, you're selling in a market, and you can't anticipate which way the market's. None of us anticipated that this kind of market was going to exist in 2021, and people who sold previously and didn't get the upswing in that, they probably bought at the same time too. So buying and selling in the same market probably got them some gains with their purchase as well.
They may not have been able to, though. If they settled in 18 months, they may not have bought and sold in the same market. I'm curious, though, because, of course, one of the things that when I was filming location, we were all around the countryside, and we certainly got used to that idea that in regional areas, certainly that the properties on acreage would take a long time to sell, or could take years in some cases to find the right buyer, or a buyer is prepared to pay enough money. And I guess that's a risk, isn't it? So that things could return to that. So, I mean, this is a podcast for first home buyers, and you've already said that most first home buyers are priced out of those types of properties. But if someone did have a bit more cash and they were looking at something like that, they do have to understand that these regional markets across the board, not just regional, city markets aren't always like this either. These conditions are, we all think that they're going to last forever, but they don't. So what I guess... what normally happens one of the things that buyers have to understand in a regional market that they may not be even thinking of now?
Yeah, this golden period or whatever in the purple patch will revert back to normality at some point. The typical trend for a regional market is a sudden growth kick for 1 to 3 years, tapering off to bubbling along. Low growth, not necessarily negative growth. We don't really get that bad. And then in 10 years' time, we'll have another kick following something that's usually happened in the capital city, like Sydney has another run. The regional centres look cheap again, and then people start to pay attention. I mean, I've always sort of used Blacktown and Orange as a comparative price point. Blacktown's always been a little bit dearer than Orange, and after the last run that Sydney had, Orange median house price was $350 and Blacktown was $850, and normally they're $350, $450, something like that. Right? And I'm just thinking, either Orange has got to kick in a big way, or Blacktown's got to come back. And Blacktown's got a 90 million GDP or whatever it is. It's a massive economic centre for Sydney. It's not going to budge. So Orange has had to come up.
You think Orange is going to catch up, ride the wave?
Orange is currently, I think it cracked 500,000. I think at the start of the year, start of last year, it would have been sub 400,000 median house price. It's really marched on.
Interesting.
I think it's still got some way to go. I don't think it's not going to parry with or get to parity with Blacktown, but it's got to close that gap, because the affordability factor of Blacktown forces people to look at alternate centres. And Orange, whilst we're using the word Orange, is actually another word for Dubbo, Wagga, Bathurst. Tamworth, they all run at a similar rate, slightly different cycles. One's up, one's down, but eventually they catch up to each other. And that's just how economics works. But it's the markets will keep values relative to each other.
I wondered about that, actually. That was going to be my question, is that, are all these regional centres, do they exhibit similar characteristics? And I guess, there's differences according to their primary industries or employers, whether they got universities and, whether there's mining, whether there's, what type of agriculture, all that sort of stuff, I imagine. But so I guess you're saying that generally speaking, the dynamics are rather similar.
Yeah, they are. Once you hit that sort of 40, 50,000 plus populations, the economies are diverse enough. All those centres just went through a pretty severe drought. Fundamentally didn't change anything. The economies are diverse enough away from agriculture that they can still kick on. COVID just happened, didn't really impact on anything, making them stronger, if anything. So, yeah, look, and why is that? Well, essential services, people still need to live. A lot of government decentralisation in those areas, universities, military, hospital, health. I think governments are probably large employers in all those centres. And obviously, as we know, with COVID, government was pretty encouraging. So they were putting people on and just creating that sort of stimulus through that kind of thing. So it's when you get into the smaller towns, 5,000, 10,000 populations, where they are a bit more of a one-horse town, and droughts impact them. If they're on a mine, something happens to the mining industry, you feel it. Parks is a good example of that. When the GFC hit, North Park's mine shut down overnight. 600 people lost their jobs. 600 people out of parks with no work is not admittedly
big
not
percentage
all.
of the big percentage of the population. Yeah. And then that flows onto the smaller businesses where they would normally spend their money, the IGAs, the corner shops, all of those other industries, the tyres, car servicing, all of those things then get affected when 600 people aren't earning an income. Matthew, we're running out of time, but I'm really curious. What are some of the mistakes that you see first-time buyers making specific to your area?
Yeah, not doing enough research is what it comes down to, and not understanding the boundaries within the town of where you should and shouldn't be, and understanding their own risk profile and what they're comfortable with. And just because it's a bit like that $50,000 house, just because something's cheap and rents well is not the reason to buy it. If you shop around within the town, you will find better comparisons or better options in better areas. And it's really about understanding the different neighbourhoods and the different sectors of each street and which side of the road you should be on and which one you shouldn't. School catchments are very critical as well. Some schools are very strict on that, and if you're in a regional town, if there's more than one public high school, you might end up where you're not where you're aiming. So there's all those things to consider.
How do you find that stuff out? How do you find out which is the best high school, which is, apart from MyGov, where it's the NAPLAN results, that's not really enough, is it? Or how do you find out where the undesirable parts of town are, other than driving around everywhere yourself? What's the shortcut? What's some hacks here?
Yeah, jump on the property forums. Facebook's full of forums where people are giving out their opinions. And look, I choose not to get involved too much in some of that stuff, but generally across the board, if you can get enough people giving the same direction, it's probably right, based on their experiences, and everyone's knowledge is based on their own experience. And the more people you can talk to, I'm always a great one when I'm trying to work something out, is asking as many people the same question as I can to see what answers I get back. Then eventually you get to the right one.
You get a bit of a pattern, do you think? It's sort of weeding through the individual answers and seeing what pattern forms.
Yeah, there's another tool that I use, a webpage called Social Atlas, which has social housing. It has all sorts of stuff on it, but one of the tools is a social housing hotspot based off the census data from 2016. And I always use that just as double checking. I think I know the markets, the locations fairly well. Yeah. Just want to be doubly checking.
That is a little piece of gold.
Love
Everybody,
it.
write that one down. We love that.
I think we need to do an episode on free sources of property data, and I think that should be added to the list.
Yeah, not every council has it, but the ones that do is great. And I've sort of checked it. I was checked it for about 12 months before I actually started to promote it to clients, just to make sure that I was comfortable with the information it was providing was actually accurate. But now, so when I have a client who's questioning, or just wants a bit of evidence about what I say, it's just not, it's not the word of God. I actually have evidence to say that I can back it up, and that's a great little heat map. It's clear. The redder, the darker the red, the higher the social housing. That doesn't mean that it's a no-go area.
It's just how you interpret the data then, isn't it, Matthew? Like everything, you can get a piece of information, but you've got to understand what to do with it, what it means and how it impacts you.
Yeah.
Right. That's right.
So true. Now, have you seen any buyers doing anything crazy recently?
Yeah. I came across some guys who, first homeowners, they worked out that they could afford, somehow they got finance for a $800,000 property. This is
quite a lot.
That'd be quite nice, I'd imagine.
For a couple of years, 5 years or so, and then whatever equity they pulled out of it then was going to be their deposit going on the house that they actually wanted to live in. So I thought that was ballsy, because if it went the other way, you'd be stuck with this property. All you can afford to do is pay the interest. So until the market's picked up and smothered your mistake, but it might work for them. It probably will. I'm not sure I'd want to be gambling like that, which is effectively what it is. Property is more of an investment in time, over time, than speculating on the market and hoping it goes up enough to cover the entry and exit costs, and you've got something left over to pull the equity out of. I haven't touched base with them yet to see how it's going for them, but
as you say, time will tell on that one.
Yeah, I guess they won't really know until they go to sell, will they?
No, that's right.
It's often the case. So what's keeping you busy? I mean, you said you've got first home buyers coming from Sydney. I'm presuming those with a $220,000 budget aren't necessarily, don't have enough money left over to pay a buyer's agent.
They're rent vesting, and they're late 30s, early 40s, first home, just been renting in Sydney. Had always had that dream to buy, but just kept getting squeezed out and the market's moved again. And every time they get a deposit saved up, it's just now not enough. So they've bit the bullet and gone, you know what, we can start a portfolio of properties we can afford. And so they're engaging me. We've got a program in place to help them. They're 20 years off the game, so they need to catch up, to try and help them build a portfolio of more affordable properties. They came through a referral from a friend who's doing it. We're doing a similar thing with, and you don't need $1 million budgets to do this stuff. You just need research and enough just to get you off the bottom rung of the ladder, just into the markets a bit, into the better markets. And buying the right property can help you minimise maintenance and risk to tenant types and that sort of thing, to help you build equity as fast as you're going to.
There's a couple of really big ones I want to pull out of there, Matt, and that is, first, it isn't too late. You said that 20, 30 years behind the game, but you can actually get started and get going and start to build towards that future. So you don't have to be in your 20s to get that first foot on the ladder, that first rung. You can be in your 30s, you can be in your 40s, as long as you actually take action. And take smart action.
Not too many risks.
Your ability to take risks decreases as you get closer to retirement, and the bank's ability or the bank's desire to take a chance on you actually decreases as well. So it's a really good point. So one, it's not too late. You can get started. You can do it. Two, you don't have to have $1 million budget, but what you do have to have is a very strong strategy. And you talked about that being a very big part of that with that family that you're working with. And three, I think the most important thing is know that local area really well, because what you know in Sydney and what you know about price growth in Sydney and what's good and what's bad, don't think you can just apply that carte blanche to Orange or Dubbo or Tamworth and get a really good outcome. So local knowledge, whether that's a full search by someone like yourself, or whether it's just a sense check if you found a property and you want someone to check into it for you, there are ways actually to engage professionals in those areas who can make sure you don't buy the wrong property and end up 10 years backwards instead of 10 years forwards.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much, Matthew. It's been really interesting hearing about the dynamics of the, regional area, central New South Wales. And, we want to do more of these episodes, and we will bring more and more of this regional insights. And I would suspect there's the principles that we've talked about in this episode would actually apply in quite a lot of states across the country.
Yeah, for sure. It's not... It's a process that you apply to different markets, and as long as you're applying the same due diligence and research and understanding your timing and your limits and your risks, getting your partner and you on the same page is very important. So you're both targeting the same thing. It's all doable. And, I think, for a $200,000 property, you probably $20,000 or $30,000 in cash as a deposit would probably get you on your way, get your finance and into it. If you're starting from absolutely zero in the bank account, it might take you a little while to build that up. But if you work it out, people can sort of get that together generally. And if that's really what you want to do, well, there's a way forward, and you don't need a $200,000 deposit before you can make your first move. Yeah.
There is hope. There is hope. There absolutely is. But it's smart buying. It's not just find it on the internet and buy it. No,
well, that's it. Out of the 800 properties I looked at this week, there's 5 that we're considering.
800. Well, it's interesting. I mean, in Sydney, where my business is, and we often say, look, we might consider looking at 10% of what's on the market. We wouldn't actually look at 10%, and we might consider recommending 10% of what we actually inspect. So you've just narrowed it down even further, 800 down to 5.
Yeah, well, you've got to be picky. You really got to be picky.
Absolutely.
And that's
it's a secret, really, isn't it? Knowing how to be picky.
Be on the right things. Yeah.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for giving us your time and to sharing your expertise with our audience. So many little pieces of gold in there to take away if you're looking at other options outside the capital cities. But even if you're buying the capital cities, there's some great pieces of gold in there as well. It's never too late.
No, thanks for having me. It's been good to chat.
Pleasure.
In this episode, we've covered a very small part of our 10-step online course for first-time buyers. If you would like to learn more about the process and how to buy without making a mistake, then head over to our website, www.homebuyeracademy.com.au. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you won't miss an episode. And if you like what you've heard today, please give us an iTunes review. 5 stars would be wonderful. It will help others find us as well.
Thank you for joining us. We hope you found this really useful. And if you have, please share the love with others who you know are in the same boat. We'll be back next week with some more priceless stuff.